Welcome back, boils and ghouls. Tonight we are talking with somebody who has impacted my life in a way that I cannot even begin to explain to you guys. I am so excited to finally get to sit down and talk some shop with Kelley Jones, guys. Okay, we are not going to just be talking about Batman tonight. We're going back to the beginning and we're going to go all the way forward. I want to get some of this stuff on the record. I've read some great stories and let's get into it. So, how are you doing tonight?
I am doing very well. How are you doing, Roman?
I'm doing great, man. I'm getting to
Okay.
talk to you. So,
Well, that's great. I get to
so
talk to you.
I read a couple of really interesting stories about how you got into the industry. Can you talk a little bit how you first got into comic books?
Well, the way it happened was I hadn't taken it. I don't want to say seriously, but I didn't think it was a possibility uh, until I had an artist I admired in Marshall Rogers see my stuff at a convention, and he had seen it through the auspices of a friend of mine. I didn't know he was going to look at it. So it was pretty left field to go in there and have it kind of a cold thing, where you just go in and have no idea. And I don't know, 16 at the time. So I wasn't really drawing comic book pages, but I was drawing a lot of creepy stuff and that kind of thing. Because I didn't know. There would be some stuff that looked like it, but I didn't really know how you do it. I just would, you see it and you replicate it. But primarily, I was interested in illustration, and I didn't have an idea of going into art at all. That wasn't. It was a hobby. I collected comics. I liked to draw, but I did a lot of other things. So after he stopped what he was doing and he took it more seriously as a potential career in Marshall. And he spent about 20 minutes, half hour, explaining how he did it in front of a pretty large crowd. Now I can see why. At the time, that it was daunting. But now being on the other side of it, there's a lot of information that he gave that I had never heard before, never even considered, of how you do it. And he had liked what he had seen a lot, and he thought I brought something different. So cut to, I start taking it a little more seriously, at least as far as it became a hobby I expanded upon. Because right around that time, my comic book mind slowed down to just certain favorites, not like, you used to go in and buy everything. It'd just be certain favorites. And about a couple years later, Marvel ran an ad in the back of Marvel Fanfare, I believe, saying that they were doing tryouts. So send in some stuff. So I sent in basically inking samples. I would pencil some stuff to ink because I'm out here in California. Nobody, there's no teaching of this. So I just did it kind of hand to mouth, sent it in. And I don't know what I was thinking. I figured after a month or so, you don't hear anything. I didn't realize, how many people might be sending in material for them to go through. So I didn't think, well, I must have not made their cut, which I understood. And I forgot all about it. I literally forgot all about it. And then about, I don't know, 8 months after that is when they got a hold of me and had said, we like what you're doing. And it was for inking. And at that point, they gave me a few test shots on various things. Butch Geiss was doing the Micronauts then, and he wasn't happy with the inking. So, and it's very apocryphal. The guy who initially got a hold of me kind of changed his mind. And he then left, and the new editor took over, but he took over also the space, the desk, the office, the whole thing. And the stuff hadn't been cleaned out. So he came across those pieces and had said it stuck out to him. So he had mentioned it to Butch because he was taking over too. He didn't want to lose Butch. And he says, well, how about if we try a new inker? He saw this stuff, and Butch gave me a couple of test shots on some posters and stuff, loved it, and hired me on at that moment. Comics isn't a thing where you like if you're going to be an engineer or something, you get this degree, you do this amount of apprenticing, it doesn't work like that. You either got it or you don't. Training doesn't matter. Learning doesn't matter. It's either you create an emotion or you don't create an emotion. And you will create it, but it also means that not every editor's that way. Some editors are like engineering. You got to know every aspect of anatomy and perspective and all that. Other editors go, wow me, just wow me. I don't care what you do. And luckily, I just, I'm not of there. I don't know. It's only told to me afterwards, all these things, you don't realize how precipitous any of that is, which is probably good. But from that moment on, Jackson asked me to join up with him. And when Butch draws, it's a joy. I really probably learned one of the great learning curves ever was just looking at his pencils for the Micronauts, which sadly will never get reprinted because of all the nonsense with it. But I would tell anyone to hunt down Butch Guice's issues because they're as good as comics get.
It was a great series, and you ran through like the end of that series, right? Up through like 58, 59 doing inks. Or you took over doing pencils on the last issue, didn't you?
Yeah. Butch went on with Bill Mantlo to go do a creator-owned project then. And I thought my job was pretty much over. I didn't see it. I mean, I just thought, well, at that point, Butch wanted to ink himself, understandably. And as any penciler inker does, they tend to want to do it themselves if they can. So I just thought my job was over. I was going to college at that time. I just had started going and had stopped to do this and figured, well, I'll just go back. That was fun. I got to do that, check it off a box. And I told the editor that. And I said, well, okay, hey, this was great. And he goes, where are you going? And I said, well, I thought it was over. I mean, the penciler quits and the writer's leaving and you guys are putting an end to the book. And he said, no. I'm going to look for your part of this now and let me find a penciler or whatever. Well, after about 2 weeks, he gets a hold of me, says, I can't find a penciler I like. All of it isn't. But he says, I went back and looked at your samples, which were now a few years old, and they were awful to me. I mean, they were just simply to show I could ink. That was, I mean, a lot of artists are self-critical. I'm not joking. They were awful. I mean, as far as what I was comparing it to in Butch's stuff. So he said, no. In fact, you don't have to do any audition or anything. I'm sending you the first script when it comes in. We'll go from there. I said, okay, that's fine. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to tell a story. I don't know how to draw. I don't know anything. And he says, that's not the problem. He says, the problem is finding something exciting. You do something exciting. I'll handle that end of it. I'll show you, I'll teach you how to do this. And he says, and don't worry about storytelling. The writer will tell you what he wants drawn. So there you just follow the writer closely. If you get a good idea, then do what you do. All of that sounds fine now. At that time, I couldn't eat a meal for about a week because that sounds like terrifying, because it's not like you're drawing. Now you're drawing in front of, 100 and at that time it was selling like 180, 200,000 copies a month. So, well, comics sold like crazy then. So that's a big audience to flop in front of, especially when you're following Jackson. And Butch was great. He said, don't worry about it. They'll blah, blah, blah. You know how to, if you know how to ink, you'll know how to draw. Yeah, that may or may not be true. I still don't know, but they gave it to me and walked me through it, you know, get a page a day done, pick one panel, make it great. Don't worry about the others, get on to the next. At the end of the week, you'll have 5 or 6 pages. You'll be on deadline and it will get easier. It will. Well, it still took me about 1.5 years to not work 17 hours a day. But a lot of it was, that's how you learn. It was without a net, but it was with very good support. I had a terrific editor, excellent writer, and some very nice inkers who knew how to fix it. But I was like, I don't know, 19 years old, something like that. I was extremely young to be doing this, and so less a fan or so less a pro, but I was all fan. I still am all fan. I still would have a hard, if I ever were to teach comics, it would be about the ideas, how to get ideas. It would not be anything to do with style. That's a totally different beast, and technical stuff. I learned all the technical, found that it got in a way, and I had to chuck a lot of technical because it wasn't giving the ideas their full impact to me. And that's, I mean, when I did my time at Marvel, that was the transition to DC, was when my ideas, I wasn't able to get those through, understandably, but they would say, Kelley, this is crazy. What are you doing? Or Kelley, do it again. And it didn't make me upset as much as think, well, maybe I'm very contrary to a lot of things. If everyone says they love it, I usually don't. If I love it, nobody likes it. So at that point, I believed them. I said, they're probably right. These ideas stink, right? But they were charming to me, what I wanted to put to paper. So when I got that opportunity to do it, hey, I was as surprised as anyone that it went over well. I knew I liked it, but I'm not my best audience, So, and the things I was interested in, nobody else was interested in. Those kind of ideas or that kind of material, depictions, as I saw them, nobody was interested in that. I thought, and probably for good reason. I don't know. I'm more of a transgressive artist in that sense, in that I'll be doing my thing unaware of the rest of the world a lot of times. But that's where my style comes from,
Yeah, I've heard you talk about in interviews, you kind of like sequester yourself from other art when you're doing stuff.
Well, you don't intimidate yourself, right? You don't want to do that. And also, in the developing of styles, to me, it was never so much at looking something you really like, no matter how much you loved it. You let it saturate you and come out that way. So in solving your own problems, style starts to develop. So that doesn't work in algebra, but it does work in art. And I didn't need, the artists that really affected me are here all the time. I can see it. So it wasn't like you physically look or something like that. But what you do want while you're working is, especially in my way of doing things, where it is the idea. If I have the idea, nothing gets in my way. And ideas come from God knows where. I have no idea. There's no way I know. I just don't know. But I know that a good idea trumps great technical art every single time. And no one remembers great technical art. They do remember a passionate idea put to paper. It doesn't matter how it's done. Written, drawn, however. And they are the ones that last a long time. They're the ones that don't date. They're the ones that still inspire. And it's even in comics, there's so many unteachables. That's the most unteachable, is the idea. And where do they come from? And a lot of people leave it up to the writer, you know, a writer's idea on something. I didn't. I figured if he has an idea, I'll marry it to mine or let it inspire me or something like that. But it does not impact me as far as what I put on paper. And that has worked for me. When I started to be allowed to do that, it has worked for me ever since. Although I don't know how it works.
The storytelling on Micronauts is extremely competent, and you said that the writer you were working with, Peter Gillis,
Mm-hmm.
was a big part
Peter
of that.
Gillis.
Yeah, I read
Yep.
some old interviews with you from around 1992, 93, where you were talking about trying to fit into the industry and looking back on your career. And I was curious, you went with Gillis, you did Chrome, that 3 issue series, and you did another piece with him from right around there, What If issue. What was the working relationship with you and Peter Gillis? Was he a big influence on you and
Well,
teaching?
Peter was a very generous guy, so he would write uh, uh, pretty pretty complex plots, pretty complex characters, and he has a tremendous intellect, very well read. And so when he's writing something, there are, especially in science fiction, there were just huge concepts. So I just hung on, you know, and I trusted him on how he wanted to do it. Um, I always felt that he was saddled with me because I was such a kid, and I didn't know, probably, and I don't see, because I've done it so long now. I even felt probably around 1990. Boy, if I could go back and do those now, because now I have kind of a grasp of how what's up here can get onto paper, not just get the job done so that makes deadline. But comics are making deadline. And so at that time, I was learning just how to make a deadline. And you just let your inspiration take you from there. The ideas started coming later, and that's when I would do Chrome with him, or even the What If with Thor. But at that time at Marvel, a lot of times they would want you to try to stay within a style, or try to stay within a frame of mind, which had worked for them. And I agreed with that. I mean, at that time, I agreed with it. That artistic soul part of you that comes out has to grow. And if you want to do comics, the first major thing is you make your deadline. That's it. The rest of it is fluff. If you can't make a deadline, you're fairly useless to them in those days. But also, if you produce a lot of art, then the things that slow you down stop slowing you down. And then your desire and your hunger for more takes over. Now I can do this, but I want to do something different, or something better, or something more exciting. You go from competing with others, or competing in that sense, to with yourself. And that competition with yourself is where anything potentially great will come. And with Peter, it was probably a great staging ground, because I wasn't working conventionally. I was working with a guy who was very should have been writing prose, actually.
In 1987, you did Comet Man,
Yeah.
and that was the first time when I was really looking at it, the art wise, I could really see Kelly Jones like starting to explode off of the page.
Yeah, that was for Marvel, and Bill Mumy and Miguel Ferrer were the writers, and they had wanted to do this thing, and I have no idea to this day why they got a hold of me. I knew the time on Micronauts was ending, and I was actually looking to, again, it always sounds like I'm going to leave, but I was looking like, okay, I'm going to move on from this, because I felt I'd done as much as I could, but that was the very beginning, the seeds of frustration that I wasn't getting to do what was in my head. And luckily they let me do that. They were very, very encouraging, because they weren't long time comic book writers, but They came in, they were open to all kinds of interpretation, the whole thing. And in those days, I felt that some of the penciling on that was some of my best work up to that point, if not my best work up to that point. And but that had a lot to do. They were very loose in their stories, very loose in their descriptions. Were goading to do more. They wanted darker, and that played well with me. And the only frustrating point I had on that, and it's not a knock on anybody, but a lot of the ways I saw things in the pencils, they would change in the inking, and that's under the, just like I said, they had a style and a skill set that they wanted, and I was going much darker, and they didn't want that. So at that point, I mean, it was never anything like Kelley, lighten up or do this. There just would be, this just seems so dark, because Marvel was used to strong lines, not heavy dark line, not shadows. And so at that point, that part became frustrating, because I would turn in the pencils. Bill and Miguel would love what they were seeing, and it would look different. But to people reading it, they were digging it. And the book sold extremely well. I mean, it was a huge seller. And they wanted to go on to do more. But as always happens, leadership changes and new people coming in and other old people going out, and deals that were made didn't have to be honored. And that whole thing was going on. So then roughly around that time is when I started making the transition, or when the transition to DC was around that time. And that's not, they had no idea. I never told them, oh, I wish it was this way, or I want to do that. That isn't what happened. Sam Keith had went over there and was doing some stuff. He said, and he and I were talking, and he says, look, I know the frustration you're having. Maybe you ought to just pick up stakes and come over here. And I said, oh, what would be different there, right? And he says, well, you never know. So I pitched in and helped him on a few inking gigs he was doing, because he got late. And but we used to do that. You used to help out other friends of yours all the time. You didn't say, I want credit or anything. You just, can you help on a few pages? Sure. And from that is where I got picked up at DC, just by them seeing some inking they had liked. I think also I had been doing some inking over Mike Mignola on Quorum at first. So they were seeing that too. So I think at first they thought, inker, just inker, because the Quorum books were well received and they liked the inking I was doing. And I didn't really want to be inking at that point, unless it was somebody of a Jackson Geis or a Mike Mignola. And that doesn't happen too often. So out of the blue, they just said they had some penciling work if I wanted. And though I was still under contract at Marvel, I wasn't pleased with what Marvel wanted me to do anymore. It was a lot of licensing stuff that was heavily controlled by the licensor. Micronauts, they didn't care. Draw whatever you want, do whatever you want. But when you got into the other ones, they started, then you didn't have just the editor looking at you. You had somebody at a company, manufacturing company, looking at it, who never read a comic book. So they were looking at nothing that what made the comic book work, they didn't want. They just wanted product placement, toy, look like what we're selling. And so at that point, it was one of those things that I wonder now where I got this, but it has, you come to a point of you don't want something taken away from you like this. And that something is whatever's burning inside you by having it doused just for money. So I I didn't so much leave. I didn't have the guts to call up Marvel and say I'm leaving. I just started working because I was under contract. But I just stopped working on that stuff and I started working on DC things. I couldn't do it anymore. I was working up my courage to call them up and say, I'm out of here. You know, I didn't worry about all the, you signed a contract and all that. So I'm a grunty little artist in nowhere, California. Who cares? You know, they'll get another guy. But I had done my time, and it was like, you have to look forward to what you're doing every day. You have to be in a good mind. It doesn't matter what you're creating. You can create the darkest, grimmest, horrible story. You got to be happy while you do it. You got to be up. And if you're just getting work, then I might as it's like making commercials. You know, it doesn't matter how good you are. You're just making a commercial. So it was probably foolish, because on a business level, Marvel was just giving me everything. DC said, here's these little 8-page stories, and you're not under any contract, and you're hired, and here you go. Without a net, we can dump you at any second, blah, blah, blah. But none of that mattered. When you're happy, it's amazing what you'll accept. And when that's something that I can't even define as being fulfilled, bang. And ideas just started flowing. I couldn't keep up with them. And it shocked me. Sometimes it was frightening. I'd be at the grocery store and bang, it would hit me. You got this will work. This will work. I didn't even care if nobody saw it. You know, it's just that you're getting to get this on paper. And that was such a fulfilling moment. And it made something come alive in the art that was far more than the sum of everything leading up to it. What was written and what was planned and all that, it exceeded that. It's one of those things where even when you're drawing it, and I'm not talking about the quality or the lack of in looking at finished art, I'm talking about you're looking at something you've never seen before yourself, and you're reacting to it, and you know that it's not this, I'm going to be embarrassed like I was with the Micronauts where I'm afraid to show anyone. This, I couldn't wait to show everyone. And I didn't care what the reaction was, because I knew this, good or bad, would get a reaction. I mean, there's nothing worse than working and no one cares. So this I knew would get a reaction. And this I knew was solving so many problems for myself. Who I wanted to be, what I wanted to be. Dead Man was Neil Adams' baby, 100%. And this was not Neil Adams. And it didn't even try to be. And I knew that no matter what, nobody else was going to do it like this. They were all going to do it like Neil, because you can figure that out. But they couldn't figure this out. And if I was trying to figure it out, I knew no one else could figure it out. It was more than just how I depicted it. It became emotional. And that's why that Dead Man, I think, and also all the stars aligned, you know, they give you a year to do it. They let you ink it. No one's hovering over you. They really don't care about it, because it's to keep copyright, you got to publish so much. They just needed page count and a product every so often. Here you go off, do your thing. Now let's go make the Killing Joke, or let's go make Watchmen or something big, you know, something with Batman. And it reminded me a lot of the guys who worked at Marvel in the 70s on the B-level books, like Werewolf by Nights and Strange Tales with Adam Warlock, you know, all these secondary characters, Son of Satan, all these books I was reading. I had kind of stopped the major books unless John Byrne was drawing it. But I was reading these B-level books where all this exciting new guys were coming along, and bizarre ideas, and Master of Kung Fu and Kazar and all these. That was the comics I was digging. And And so I got my turn at that on this Dead Man thing where nobody cared. And I was off in the corner, and the company didn't live or die based on me being successful or not, like if you were doing Batman or Superman. So still in all, I didn't want anyone to see what I was doing because I didn't want to be told no. And it's like when you are preparing a sketch for a cover or something, I typically don't like doing that. I know you have to, but I don't like doing it because I don't know if they can read a sketch, right? If someone can just look at a few squiggles and see what I'm seeing, they'll just say no. And I didn't know if they would be able to read what I was doing. I know they saw some of these early Action Comic weeklies with him, but they hadn't seen me ink it yet. And they hadn't seen me go full tilt. And so I didn't show many. It was, I think the first one was like 48. They're 2 48-page books. And I didn't turn in anything art-wise. I think I'd drawn over 40 pages or so. And I wasn't showing them. And they were starting to get worried. Like, as I found out later, a lot of artists lie. You know, yeah, I'm working on it, and they're not. Yeah, everything's cool. It's not cool. And that was their thing. I was working on this every day and really putting it together. So finally, when they said, look, there was no what we're doing right now. You had to make a copy, put it in a package, and send it to them. So that was a few days. I missed those days. Those days was the Wild West. They had to trust you. You could always say garbled in transmission. You know, you could a lot more freedom. Anything that gives an artist freedom, they're going to want. If you told a guy right now, we'll cut your rate by 20%, but you have no scans, no computer, no nothing. They don't see anything until you turn it in. They'd take it. You'd be free. So, so at that point, I was in this heavenly place where you're just drawing. Nobody in the world had seen it. Nobody but me. There's a sadness almost. Bernie Wrightson's the only other guy who said something similar when we were talking about when it's just you and the material, there's this perfect joy because it's just you and the material. No comments, no one has their interpretations, nothing yet. And there's a sadness when you know it's going to go in to be seen or go to press and be released. He said that to me about Frankenstein, you know, the first few times with Frankenstein, you know, it was just him and maybe a few friends of his would see it. And then there's that, because then it becomes the world's, which is the way it is. No matter what Stanley Kubrick thinks, we all have our interpretation of 2001, you know? It's as much my movie as it is his movie. And that's how you have to treat it. So it would be everyone's Dead Man, not mine. And I got that. But when they saw it, it's the great unwritten rule. Do not break the rules unless you can do it really well. They leave out unless you do it really well. They just say, do not break the rules. So I was breaking rules everywhere. Some I didn't even know I was breaking. And it worked. I mean, it worked at that level. When they were, and an editor, a company, if they look at it and go, wow, that's good, even though it's totally different than what they thought or what they were looking for. And at that point, I didn't trust. That's why I always tell people, trust your instinct and your idea. Because I'm nowhere near the draftsman of a Neil Adams. I'm nowhere near the draftsman of a lot of these guys. But frankly, who cares if you can come up with an idea? Because I'll take that idea and go, a lot of those guys never come up with something radically different. They just show you how many bootlaces go in a boot or how many pockets are on a guy, but they don't expand the universe. And they don't show you places in that universe. And then I always figured with me, people know they will see something different. Doesn't mean they'll like it, but they will see something different. Why not? Because the alternative is boring. And I know if it's for me as a fan, and that's why I always keep my fan credentials much higher than the professional end is only, I will make a deadline. The rest of it, I chuck. I don't have how to draw books. how to art books, how they do things books. I don't want that. What I want is sometimes I'll be inspired by things that have nothing to do, I mean, art-wise, they have nothing to do with art, nothing to do with that. So that has paid off for me over and over and over, to where, but it's embarrassing because if I'm asked, I go, I don't know how I do it. I frankly do not know how it happens. And I think if that's the case with me, who's a regular middle level schlub in the world, it's true for everyone. Ideas are the thing. It's just but how many people focus on that and try to sharpen that skill? You know, not get the abs right, not get the whatever the hell right. It's focus that, and then try to marry this bizarre nebulous thing with some way to control it with a technical skill. And how much do you lose of one or the other? You gotta, and that's the thing. So I found that at certain times, you know, I'd have someone come up to me and say, well, other artists, I'm not talking fans, but I'd have other artists who would get very dismissive of me and say, and I don't take it badly. They go, well, you got this wrong and this wrong and this wrong, and that's not right. And I went, okay, well, I know that those things are wrong, but they didn't help me get to where that idea worked. I had to change it to make the idea work. I had to force this any way I could to get the line right, to get the impact right, to get whatever right. And I realized at that point I was talking to people who didn't understand, though they drew comics and drew them very well, but they didn't understand it. So at that point, I went, okay, thank God I'm not having to sell to them, or they're an editor. Okay. But at the same time, I'd be sitting there with 300 people online and they'd have nobody. And I went, not like I'm bigger than you. It's not that. It's like I'm connecting. None of these people are even thinking that. And they're not coming to me with the stuff that I followed the rules on. They're coming to me at the stuff I did not follow the rules on. And so it isn't like I followed the rules. Oh, I figured it out. That's not working. It isn't like that. It's after the fact I went, oh, there you go. The proper answer was follow that part of your heart, that emotion you get. That when you look at art, it's an emotional reaction. So why not when you create it? It all is emotion. No one's sitting there taking notes. But I think the people that were critical of me they were desperate for some kind of mathematical equation to explain the universe. So there's never going to be one. It's just never going to be. But you can all appreciate a sunset. I don't need to know how it works. I don't need to know. I just go, wow, that's beautiful. I don't need an astronomer to tell me how the sun and the atmospheric conditions and the angle of the earth. So, but that's the thing. And you try to keep all of that heady crap in check enough to get the work in on time, though, because I do think on the other side of it, a lot of the guys who worry so much about the boots and how many pockets and all that can't keep a deadline either. So they'll do 2 or 3 books and then they're done. And I think I learned Batman in particular, the monthly run, having to do 36 issues in 3 years, it teaches you on that kind of a spotlight, it teaches you how to draw. Just simply, you have no time to mistake. If it's not the best idea, make it look good. If it's a great idea, you don't get to spend 3 months on it. You get your day, you do it. And so those two things help forge it too. But I was lucky in that I'm naturally pretty quick. And I think that's due to inking. I don't have to draw all day. I know exactly where the ink lines will go. I can do that. And enough to where even if I had to hand it off to an inker, they would know, okay, all the stuff they need is there, all the rest. In fact, I've always had people who ink, specifically full-time great inkers, want to ink my work, because that allows them to be an artist too. I leave a lot open. All the stuff you need is there, but all the stuff I like to draw with a brush or a pen too. And that's why, I always figure out they'll never read this sketch, or they'll never understand the layouts on this. And to this day, I'll have editors get a hold of me and they'll be totally shocked at the final results because they didn't see it. And then they'll admit to you, like, I was a little worried until I, but that's been my whole career. That's why I don't show anything as long as I can. So they'll be committed to the project just simply by time is gone, and this is the only art you're going to get. So just trust me.
So that brings me to a question. In I think it was 87, 88, you did a series called Aerators with Jim Sinclair.
Yep.
And Sinclair would go on to ink the Max, and has been inexorably linked to Sam Keith, which you also seem to be kind of intertwined with Sam Keith. Your career has hit a couple of very pivotal points. I was wondering how you got hooked up with Jim and how you got hooked up with Sam.
Well, we knew each other long before we ever became professionals. Sam, I met through a friend when we were both in high school. And Sam went to a different high school, but I had a couple classes with a cousin of his. And she would say, "Oh, my cousin does this kind of thing," and the whole thing. And so we met through that met through a mutual friend as well. And he was interested in a lot of the same things I was interested in. First, just getting a good line down, a lot of blacks, a lot of rendering to do certain things. We would come up. I think one of the things I always liked was, and it was probably true of a lot of inkers, but we didn't know anybody. We were out here in Sacramento, and it was there's an art community. It was very small and not very good. I mean, we were just all kind of stumbling around. We were on our way to something, but we would have the same things. And I remember telling him that I wasn't happy with my inking because it looked too much the same. And he actually said, yeah, he's running in that too. And so we were trying to figure out how you get clean, random lines rather than all the same lines to give volume and texture to what you were inking. And then, and at that point, so he and I would talk a lot about those things. And then I wouldn't see him for a long time. He wouldn't see me because he was at a different high school and I was at a different high school. And then we would see each other over at this mutual friend's house, or we would talk. And so we stayed kind of, our careers were kind of doing the same thing in different ways. And ultimately, he once said to me, and I'll never forget it. I was sitting there and we were talking like we were about wanting to do the same, break out a little bit. And he says, well, you're going to have to come to you'll come to the conclusion, Kelley, that you'll get tired of making other people's dreams realized rather than yours. And that stuck with me. He says, when you start wanting to spend time on your own, then whatever you want will happen. And that was true. That was true. And that had always stuck with me. And then we'd go back to, how do you do this? How do you do that? He would look at what I was doing, which was, at that time, we were very similar, but very different in our approaches. And so I picked up a lot from him. He picked up a lot from me, and it just sort of worked from there. And the things we started getting interested in were aspects within the drawing, compositional things within the drawing rather than the drawing itself, to make it more interesting. And it just sort of took off from there. I mean, that's how I, and to this day, I always look back on that. And I think that was probably one of the best art classes I had, was just sitting with another guy. You're both trying to do the same thing, but you're coming at it at different angles. We both enjoyed, for example, dry brushing a lot. We both enjoyed working in light and dark in a way that was different than just rendering them, but just sort of making it through either spray or fingerprints or whatever you could to get a different kind of texture or look down. We deeply loved 4-color printing on newsprint. We were devastated when it went away, because your effects, it would be like John Lennon had once said, if you can't play the guitar, just play louder and distort it, and then it sounds great. And that's, to this day, he's right. So we were looking for distortion, and we were looking for all kinds of effects that lesser quality paper, lesser quality printing afforded you. I missed it. And as soon as it went to a fancier paper, a cleaner paper, that's what made people go to more machined looking inking. And I then tried to figure out, well, how do I get around that? And my way of doing it was turn up the darks and simplify the color palette to almost like a stained glass window. So that way you would make the whatever blacks you laid down pop, not the color part. The color part would be there to hold it. He was doing something similar where, and eventually when he went on to Image, he was so frustrated with it, he just started watercoloring a lot of his own stuff to get around it, because it is something that would be the only solution at that point. But regular comics aren't going to do that. And I had to sit with colorists and explain to them, it's a stained glass window you're doing. You're not doing realistic world atmospheric colors unless I'll say so. I always used to tell them to look at Star Trek, the old first season of Star Trek, where they would have all these really bright colors and backlit everything and put halos around stuff. And I said, that's how I got to do it, because I don't want to sit there and do all this machine inking, line work and little crosshatches that aren't doing it for me. They're not making it, my stuff, look the way I want. And I didn't want to look like everybody else. Everybody was looking the same. So I figured sink or swim. It's probably one of the things I did as a commercial decision, because at that time, everything started looking the same. And the people I was I saw people I really admired changing their styles to fit that. And I didn't want to do that. I mean, if it works, it works, if for whatever it is. But Deadman and the way I did Batman and Sandman, they were very different than the X-Men, and they should be drawn very differently.
I don't want to beat Sam Keith over the head. I just got done doing a 7-hour long documentary on him, and it is a hilarious coincidence because I'm dyslexic and dysgraphic, so I didn't learn to read until I was almost 10 years old. The comic book that made me learn to read was Hulk 368. And when I looked into that, I found out that Keith had basically, from what I understand from a story he told, like showed up with a package of unfinished art at your house and was like, hey man, I got to get this done by the weekend. Can you help me bust this out? And like you said, you didn't turn down friends in those days. Is that true?
Yeah, we did it. I had I had a drawing board, and I said, well, Sam, all I have is a portable board that I put on a table when I'm traveling or something. I'll take that if I'm under a deadline and you have to do a signing somewhere and the inking is due. I would bring that. I never used it though. I just realized now I'm never going to do that. But I had this thing. I still have it. He says, that'll be all I need. That'll be all I need. And I said, okay. So for that period of time, he came over. We'd order pizzas at 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, and we would just work until late. And that's a lot of our BS, and would go back and forth there, and we'd be talking back and forth. And he would reach a point where he goes, I don't want to work on this page anymore. And he would just hand it to me. And so I would start working on it. And then or he would keep reworking. I remember once, and I love this. It's one of the good things when you're around someone like this, where he was reworking a panel and reworking a panel, and he'd get very frustrated. He'd go get white it all out, let it dry and say, I'm not digging this. He'd do it again and do it again. And finally, he got so frustrated, he just cut it out. Got a pair of scissors and he cut the panel out. He drew it on a different page and he did whatever it was, pasted it in. And that kind of courage or that kind of bravery or that kind of disrespect for this, how we keep these pages nice and clean. One of the things I liked was when I finished the day, especially inking like that, I'm covered from ink and just white out and ink all over. So was he. Everyone else I knew was clean and meticulous, was proud that they didn't use whiteout. I told him, I said, I'm one of the few guys who actually goes through a whiteout bottle in about 3 weeks. I mean, I'm using it for everything. He did too. I had brushes other people would chuck, but I would keep them because you got great technical results from a dry brush that way. So did he. We were both, again, solving the problem of random clean lines where the lines wouldn't match, but they'd give the illusion of texture. So he was doing the same thing. All of the same little confusing things that drove you nuts, for me, were same with him. We both worked as conventionally as we could, and then, like at night, became this different person. So, when the Hulk thing came, he was, he was at wit's end, and that happened with the Batman covers. He got at wit's end over that. And he said, "I'm out of here. I can't." They were freezing him up. He didn't know why. I don't know why. He does a fabulous Batman, but they just did. They just were freezing him, and that'll happen. No rhyme or reason, and so. I was doing regular Batman, and that's really the reason I got Detective. He was going to do Detective, I was going to do Batman for a couple of issues, and then they would, once they got caught up, they were going to put the regular guys back on it. But it kind of took off. It was one of those things. But that's how a lot of those things worked. I used to, I would get. We at that time, he would say, he would look at how I screwed around with Deadman. I'd look at how he screwed around with Wolverine, and you felt, well, okay, somebody else is doing it, so it's okay to screw around with these characters, you know. And once you've had a little bit of acceptance, it would grow from there. So I would see him doing well, he'd see me doing well. And again, it was an odd thing because he'd say, "God, we're out here in Sacramento, and there is there's nobody else. It's just us out here." And so there was no one saying no. There was no one telling you couldn't do it. I was fortunate. Guy who ran a chain of stores out here at that time, it's gone now, but there's a chain of stores called Comics and Comics, and the owner was Bud Plant. He was a silent partner. But the guy who ran it for him was a guy named Scott Maple, and he used to take my naive little head and say, "Well, you may think this is good, but here's Wally Wood's work, and go look at this. And he would show me great artists, which I had not, how am I going to have access to an old EC comic? So he would take it off the wall, treat it well, go home and read this, and you'll see. And it did. So it was one of those things where I was lucky at that time. I knew him, what Scott Maple was doing, Sam Keith, what he was doing. Just these weird little things all come together. Nothing like, because I took art classes and they taught me nothing. I learned more and had more excitement just sitting with a week, Sam and I working out that Hulk issue. And that's the trouble. That's why when people say, "How do you do this?" or whatever, I go, "I don't know." I mean, I have Sam Keith come over and you guys sit and, have a guy like Scott take a book off the stand or the wall that's worth about $400 and say, "Treat it well, but go look at this guy." Those are intangibles. And then you realize the whole damn thing is intangible. It's a thing where you have to be able to understand it when it happens, and even if you don't understand it, not reject it if it happens. So, and just be open minded. I mean, I was I would say to this day that the just the discussions I would have with Sam were good, because at that point you knew, okay, at least somebody else is facing this, because he would say, well, they felt this way about something, and I'd look at it, I go, well, it's beautiful, wait until it comes out. Once you have the fan support, then they'll go, okay. And that was kind of happening for him. It was kind of happening for me.
And I don't want to beat the Sam Keith thing over the head. I want to talk about
Eat it.
you, but I don't have many direct lines to Sam. He is an extremely guarded person. And I know the experiences on Sandman 1 where Karen made him redraw the entire issue for free and then essentially berated him over his style had a
Yep.
very profound impact on Sam right around
Yes, it
that
did.
time. And he was doing upwards of 6 to 10 covers a month at some points when he was when he was working on those MCP covers and the Bat Family covers that he froze that would be so integral to your career.
Yeah.
I was curious, do you keep in touch with Sam at all at this point?
We will get a hold of each other from time to time, but yeah, um he's a very open person, but yes, he is. He kind of does his own thing. But he's always been that way. It isn't like, oh, he's a recluse or something like that. He's just, that's the way he is. And to be honest, one of the things he liked about me was I have all my friends are civilians. I have no, I go out in the world. Most of them don't even know I draw comic books. And I think a lot of times there's that too. But no, I think he's always been private, but not in some weird way. It's just how he is, you know? And he's a very considered thinker. There's a lot of thoughts going on. He's a big reader and a big thinker. And I don't think the word eccentric is, I'm eccentric. I don't think he's eccentric. I think he's found his way of doing things, and that's what it might be perceived that way. But I find that yes, when he was, because when I came over to do Sandman, he was very like, are you sure you want to do this? Yeah, because he was still pretty raw from that. And he says, you just did what you were doing and they're letting you do whatever you want. So when I went into Sandman, I said, well, I've just, I've done a couple of things there. I worked with Karen only on one book prior to that, a Swamp Thing. And I said, I wasn't, I didn't run into any of that. But I might have caught it at a good time. Sandman was a very cult book. And the stories I got, I was there, went from, hey, this is a really good book, but 40 people might have liked it, to after specifically the cat issue, then it went to 600. And at that moment, I was also in a good situation, as always happens. The books were really late. When I was getting the scripts, they were extremely late. So there was no time to fiddle and faddle with it. And I would just go in and tear into it, and that would be that. But I also was very aware of that attitude, that they'll come in. I'm not big on, we're doing important comics, so therefore we must be, no, we're doing comics and they're different, and doesn't matter how they're produced as long as the ideas, Neil's ideas were coming through. So it doesn't matter how you drew it. I mean, there's probably better suited or whatever, but it wouldn't have mattered. George Perez could have drawn it beautifully. It was the ideas were that strong. So stylistically, I'm not a Nazi on that. I don't mind whatever someone does, as long as you get the feeling they're speaking to you. I think they missed an opportunity with Sam just being Sam. I mean, I don't say that as loyalty to Sam. I just think they missed an opportunity. And it was sometimes great editors can make a mistake, and they made a mistake.
I can see that. I was just curious. I know that it did kind of have a pretty profound impact
Oh,
on
it
Sam.
did. I mean, you could tell it did. He was uh, very expressive, more so than normal when he knew I was going to do some of those, because he was warning me. Like, you don't know, you've been working in safe areas, and they left you alone. And so I went in there girded for it. And if I mean, I had no trouble at that point pulling the parachute cord too. If there was too much, all right, I'm out of here. You go do it. It's your football. So at that point, I went into there with that attitude, and but also I think Neil became much more of a presence than when Sam, and he's coming in, he's just getting started. By that time, he was pretty much now. His opinion was the one they were worried about. And when I was working with him, we would talk on the phone. A lot of times he was going through a period, and I don't think he was with Sam. He was going through a real writer's block period. So we would have long talks on the phone about what he was thinking or what he wanted to do or something. I had nothing invested in Sandman, right? I came in there as a total freelancer. So I just knew that what I had seen prior to it was, all I said was, yes. He says, what do you think? I said, it's very nice, but the art is static to me. It's very still and talking heads. So I don't want you to do action or anything, but I'm going to mess with that. So I have something to look at, different angles. I said, I'm going to always make it look like the wind's blowing on the Sandman's cape or something. So there's visual. I'm going to mess with how all the regular people are the same, but Sandman's going to change from time to time because his dreams change all the time. He loved all that, and the Dream Country stories came from him being in that mindset of I'm going to do one shots to get out of this writer's block thing. He wanted to do Seasons of Mist. And so I knew the deadlines were bad. I knew the writer was in that situation. You're kind of at that point, you can take advantage of that or just step up, get the work done, and go from there. And it worked out. I mean, and Sam wasn't in that situation. Sam was they had already written him. They had it very clear. He was brought on later. You will do this thing. And yeah, it was, and I know that though the inking I thought was good, he didn't like it because he has a very clear way of how you do it. And he felt it was for him to leave it as soon as he did. That Sam is a guy who has to be invested in it. He can't be bored. And if he is, he's gone. And he's also someone, if you're editing him, you just sort of go, okay, you let go of the reins. You have to do that because he does not know where he's going. But if you force him into a position that he doesn't want to go, he'll dry up and blow away. He doesn't want to do it. That's it. Now, if professional comic book people, like I was telling you here, that they go bonkers, I think it's worth it. I can see what they're doing in 15 books out of 15, but he's a guy, even when he's at his most, I don't care and not interested or whatever. There's always a panel of great genius in there. And one you've never seen before. That's worth it to me. I mean, I sign on to anything he does just for that.
Sam's an unparalleled genius, but he does
I do
unfortunately.
too. I agree.
He does seem to be, at least in some case, in some way, a somewhat tortured genius. He just doesn't.
I think, yeah. I mean, the things he's interested in, the things I was interested in, like I said, a lot of them weren't things that you should be interested in when you want to draw comics. I liked, like I said, B-level comics, undergrounds. He liked undergrounds. We liked the same stuff. And when you're trying to put that into a mainstream book, you're going to get a lot of resistance. Sam was too ahead of his time with Karen. If you were to go 5 years later, they'd all go, yeah, do that. But at that time, they were still trying to walk the walk that Alan Moore and Steve Bissette were doing. And can't do that. You can't take the same territory twice. You just bring in other people and do their thing. Yeah, I mean, could the first few issues of Sam and Ben better? Yeah, if they'd have left them alone. Just leave them alone. And they would have been fine. But they couldn't see it yet. They didn't know everything was developing. I was fortunate because on Dead Man, at the same time they were doing that, I'm doing Dead Man, nobody saw what I was doing. And on a monthly, they got to see it. They got to, everything, the production line has started. If they'd have started Sandman as a graphic novel or something like that, yes, then you can argue it behind the scenes and wrestle with all that. But they didn't have the virtue of his now his work. You know, now you can look at Marvel Presents or any of the things he's done and go, okay, there, you know. But again, your regular mainstream artists, they don't understand Marvel Presents or any of that. They don't get it. And they will bitch and moan. And I just go, yeah, but he's going to be remembered. You know, this stuff, it's like it stops you every time. And it still doesn't look dated. That's the measure.
No, it's like your work. It's extremely unique. It's bitingly original, and it stays with you forever. It is like seared into your mind. I just absolutely love that quality about his work. But I did a 7-hour documentary about the guy, and I talked to, I think, about 40 or 50 people that have worked with him over the years. And I'm going to tell you, you're the second person that has actually told me that they've kept in contact with him since 1995. It was awful. He got sued on the max by some dink, and it just seems like he never really bounced back.
No, and it's, look, I will say he's deeply affected by the world, but then that's an artist. And there's all kinds of crap like that will happen. And some people it'll affect, they'll react differently. Like I said, I recharge my batteries because none of my friends are into comics. None of the people I know in the world are into it. That's how you recharge, to actually just do it. But then I think, yeah, how many heart surgeons want to go hang out with a bunch of heart surgeons, talk about hearts? You know, they go to a baseball game or anything to get away from what they do. Maybe that's how it is. I think with he and I, in that regard, we're both kind of that way. I'm not as alienated from it as he has been, but we both had similar things where you just go, it, you know. But I don't go and look at I always used to tell him, the one thing we can't be is victims, because when you put it out there, you're asking for it. When you put something out there, that's the thing. I think what was happening to him, it was inside. People that shouldn't be doing it were doing it. So, you know, but no, I could call him up right now. He'd answer the phone. We'd talk.
Oh, that makes me so happy. I talked to Bill Mesner-Loebs, and like he doesn't even have a way to get in touch with him, and they knew each other for 30 years. I talked to so many people like that. Like I said, I don't want to beat the Sam Keith thing over the head. I just, with Hulk 368, it literally is the reason I learned to read. It helped me overcome my learning disabilities, and the entire world as I know it would not exist without you and Sam Keith. And doing that documentary about Sam and finding out he, like you said, he's not a recluse like everybody says he is. Everybody likes to talk about him like he's Howard Hughes or something.
Yeah.
But he did go through a period where it seems like he felt like he needed to cut a lot of extra guff out of his life.
Yeah. And sometimes you just don't want to hear about the industry. So it isn't like he would be upset with Bill or anybody. It's just like, I don't want to talk about the industry. I don't want to be around it. It would cause, you know, anxiety or something, whatever. you just want to go do your own thing. There was a time in the, I don't know, 06, 07, 08, somewhere around there, a great editor who's not editing at DC anymore was Michael Seglain. And that's a guy who flew so under the radar that if you say it, no one knows. You know, he was handling Batman and everything. But he was handling me. He was handling Sam beautifully. He did not get in your way. He wanted his own little circle of cool artists, he said. I want the cool guys here to do the stuff and let the other guys do their thing, and let's just do our stuff, right? So I did a couple of miniseries for Mike, some one-shot, all Batman things. He was Sam was doing a graphic novel for him, and he knew how to wrangle Sam and me. And he would say to me, he wouldn't ask me about Sam. He would just say, "You guys are a lot alike in how you do your thing, or whatever. And once you know you can trust me, I get everything." So even if it didn't go our way, we knew Mike was fighting for us, or Mike would do that. Sam was fine with that. I mean, he was having a blast. I was having a blast. And then DC made the decision to move to California, and Mike was a diehard New Yorker, you know, and he's almost like Henry Hill, but Henry Hill didn't go into, if Henry didn't go into the mob, but went into comics, you know, very nice guy, very pleasant guy, you know, but he's got a Sicilian mom and an Irish father, and he can't leave those streets, you know, he cannot leave it. So, and I think if DC had stayed in the whole thing, there'd be a whole different world for both of us. It's both been fine for us, but it would have been more, because Sam would do things, I would do things. You reach a point and you go, well, I want to do this thing that we didn't decide to do, and it's different than what we wanted to do, but can we do it? Mike would go, okay, fine. Let's give me a chance to process it. I'll work it all out. We'll do it. And that's what Sam would do with him. We got really good results that way. And even if the results weren't exactly, the finished product was really cool. And, but that was, Seglain knew how to deal with him and not baby him, not anything. They'd get on the phone and work their asses off. They would really put in the hours. Mike is still the hardest working editor I've ever met, and the most visionary, and now he's, you know, running Lucasfilm. So, you know, good luck to him there. But I mean, he's a genius. And so Sam and I got to work with a guy who was a very quiet genius and does not do social, doesn't have a social media presence. All the people you're talking about are kind of fly low, you know, they just fly low. And I think it is due to the fact that it's pretty awful when you're a decent person and someone comes out of the woodwork and says, redraw a book, or we're going to sue you, or something. Sam's had some pretty rough stuff like that. Mine kind of just fall into the typical comic stupid people you run into. But overall, you know, I can slough it off better, I think, than he can. Maybe, you know, for me, it helps when you got a couple of kids. That right there, I remember having a pretty rough period, but my kid got a double and won a baseball game, and I didn't give a shit what happened in the comic book world. You know, he hit it down the line and won the game, and everyone went crazy. And that didn't, at that point, I don't care. You know? So I had that going on, you know. Sam doesn't have that going on because he didn't have children. So you become more focused in comics. I mean, my wife has nothing to do with it. You know, she's a civilian. They're all civilians. So at that point, you know, you're not trapped by a constant drumbeat. And it allows for, I think, a better a better understanding of yourself when you sit down to work. You know, what is it that I will fight for? What of it I don't care, you know, I can cut loose. So at that point, it makes it, I've had people say they felt my work has gotten better. And if that's the truth, it's because of that. It's because I've been still working at getting better. And I think Sam does that too. You know,
I absolutely agree. And like I said, I don't mean to digress. I want to talk about you tonight. It's just I don't have
no,
many direct lines to Sam, and he just doesn't have much of a voice out there. Like he's
no,
got little bits of things and that kind of stuff, but a lot of his fans legitimately are kind of worried about Sam in a lot of ways.
no, he's, you know what? He's fine. It's the way he is. And he's been that way since I was 16 years old. There just was no social media then, you know? But like I said, in high school, we had a mutual friend who blew us away as far as talent went. And that's what we were attracted to. We'd go over and just look at this guy's art. And we were like flabbergasted. And we'd look at each other and go, well, we'll never be this good. So he went his route and I went my route. But it's all how your brain controls so much, your attitude. And this mutual friend, he just imploded. You know, just imploded. And whereas he could do stuff, it's like it just went off into it just wasn't very good anymore. There wasn't that thing. And I think that was a conscious lesson to both he and I, that you can have this truly God-given gift and it can go away if you don't. And he got distracted by other things and it went away. And so if there's a way I would sum up Sam and I that's the most similar, it's ideas. He's an idea guy, I'm an idea guy. That's it. And I think we probably learned that from this mutual friend who just couldn't do it anymore. But I will say to this day, I've not seen anyone as naturally, even now, I want to say I've naturally gifted, Frazetta, not like he drew like Frazetta, but that ability like Frazetta could just draw. And it was right on. And every time you look and you go, that is the best angle, the best pose, and the best way to do it. You can't even read nothing. And that's what we had in this friend of ours for about 2 years. He was like that. Just nothing. Amazing, God-given talent. I've never seen it. And it went away because he got distracted by other things. Nothing bad, nothing like that. Just, and then when he tried to come back, it went away. And that's that was a cautionary tale. We would talk about that. Not that you can stop. Yeah, I can stop for a long time, but that's where the idea thing came in. And that's the same with Sam. It was like, I've got to do this. Sam would have these bizarre ideas, but once you saw it on paper, you went, well, that's really, I've never seen that before. That's beautiful. But if he just told you to go, that's nuts. Well, then you know it's good. When I would tell people that, I got that's nuts. So we used to go, all right, we won't talk about it. We'll just do it.
Oh, so thank you so much for indulging me. Like I said, like that comic just changed my life, and there's so much. It's just disinformation out there about Sam because people like to play him up as Howard Hughes.
Well, that's more interesting, isn't it? I mean, no, it's more interesting. It's more interesting to say things like that. Look, I had it inside DC where they thought, you know, I went off and did my own stuff for a while and they thought I was upset with them. I just didn't speak with it. Wasn't like a thing or anything. You just want to do other things. People start filling in the blanks. And then finally, when they get a hold of you, say, no, I'm fine. Call and ask. I'm fine. I mean, I'm not an employee that way. And the same with Sam. I think what happens though is it's far more interesting to say he's some reclusive guy off doing weird stuff. No.
Well, I do know that Sam hit a point where he basically did stop answering his phones. Like I found a repeated quote where he said, I used to answer my phone all the time. I used to be on it all the time. Like you said, these huge, long conversations.
We had very long conversations, yes.
Yeah, and at a certain point, Sam said, if you look at your answering machine, there will be 28 messages. And out of those, 25 of them will be people lying to you.
He'll come out of the blue. There was an obscure little friend of mine pointed this out to me because I'm not good hunting down stuff or whatever. I don't really look. And but a friend of mine got a hold of me and he says, "Hey, I'm going to send you a link. I want you to go." This is several years ago. And it's before the comic book presence online really exploded. So you'd see a thing here, a thing there. And there was some site that was doing a thing on some few books I had done with Batman. They were just talking about those. And I wondered why when he sent it to me, he says, "I want you to look at this, but it's not the article. Just read the comments thing. Just read it and then get back to me." He said, "I don't want to tell you." So I go and I read the comments thing, and there'll be people say, "I really like the long ears. I don't like the long ears. Okay, yeah, that whole thing." And then some guy in there, and you hear it, so you get that, and then that's par for the course. And but there was one guy who took great exception to how I did what I did. Just fundamentally didn't, and it was very pithy. I thought it was funny, but took great exception to it, and too dark, and and does all these things are wrong. There was such an impassioned response right after that was saying what worked, why it worked, and the whole thing, and it was Sam Keith who did it. So he found this obscure site and read this thing and then went off on this guy. Who's going to read it but 4 people? Right? So my friend he says, is that not cool? Because he knew Sam. And I said, that was very cool. I said, but with that, you realize at that point, he does have his eye on things. He is looking. He's not outside of it. I know how Sam is a guy who would, sometimes he'll say, "Yeah, you're right. I should have done this," or "This doesn't look right." And other times he'll say, "It looks better than anyone else." I mean, you don't know which Sam you'll get at that thing, but because it's not an arrogance, it's a psyching yourself up to do something. And I do that. You psych yourself up to do it, especially when you're going to do something and you're not in the comic book traditional club. Because I'm certain I know he's heard the same thing, like from other, how can this, and look at this, and it's not right, and he did that, and it's all wrong. And from people who frankly aren't artists. They may draw comics, but they're not artists. And what you do when you don't understand it, but something successful, is you shut up and you back off and you just say, "Salute, I don't get it, but it's okay." I mean, doesn't mean you shut up. It's just, you shut up because there's something here working that you can't understand. I love him, but there's so many people that would be like a Jim Lee or a John Buscema. You can break it down, understand it. You can understand Mike Mignola. You can understand them. You cannot understand this. Yet it has this impact that actually does not look dated like some of their stuff will. And that can only come from this, wherever he's coming from. And it's not a denigration. Everyone works within their times. If you look at art in anything, they work Renaissance. They work within their times. Then there's these guys that just orbit that, and they come in like a comet every once in a while, and you just, wow, there you go. And that's what happens. And he falls into that. I mean, why can't you like Jim Lee and Sam Keith? I don't know. You like them both. I do. I dig both. And I don't think one's greater than the other, but there comes this thing. And so when you're like that and you're a comet, people are going to invent urban legends about you, I guess, or just say stuff. They don't know, he's a loyal guy. He'll show up to whoever. He'll do those things. I think he carries his wounds deeper, but then again, that's the mark of an artist.
He just seems like a very emotionally intense, intellectual, and self-contained individual.
Well, I love every part of that. I love that description, and that's why I love him. I mean, that's exactly all of that's good.
I would absolutely agree with that. It just seems to have kind of backfired on him in the time of social media and being with Image Comics at the rise of Image Comics and the amount of piranhas and phonies and fakes and people trying to take advantage and do God knows only what that I will never know about.
Well, none of that's changed.
No, but I'm just saying, I think he came into that very ill prepared off of his Marvel Comics Presents run, and his relationship with Terry Cavanaugh, the editor on that series, was really good, but they blackballed him from doing interiors on Marvel work after that Blood Hungry story. And
Yeah.
I don't think Sam understood that. And so when he went to Image and everybody was like, hey, let's do this, the Topps card set or Maximum Sound or the cartoon, Sam felt like he was in a position where he had to say yes because he was going to
Yeah.
miss an opportunity or something. And I know that some of the people he got involved with really undermined his basic faith in people inside of the.
Well, he see, I remember him coming over to my house around the time that they were talking about uh, making the cartoon and stuff like that. And he was very unsure. I hadn't kept up with any of the particulars. I'm like anyone else. I just see what I see and go, that's really cool, But he came over and I was on Batman at that time. And he said that he didn't trust a lot of the opinions he was getting. What did I think? And I told him what I thought of some stuff and whatever, and it matched with what he was doing before he told me. I mean, it's a secret test kind of thing, but I told him. And he trusted me because I think a lot of people got jealous and a lot of people didn't understand and a lot of people think they're better and a lot of people don't get it. But he was communicating to a bunch of animators who were going, man, everything looks the same. Hey, here's something different. I run into that still. Like, we want you because everyone else looks the same. Well, he got that too. The difference for me is I do go into it. I used to tell him all the time because he would ask me, doesn't this bother you? You're killing yourself on these stuff. Like, I think it was Batman, and there'll be someone say the cape's too long or the ears are too long. Doesn't that piss you off? And I go, no. I said they're just either they wish they'd have come up with it or they don't get it. I said, but given enough time, they'll change their mind, Sam. They'll change their mind. I said, it'll happen. There will be people who will change their mind because something honest or sincere always does. You're honest and sincere, so don't worry about it. But he can't, I don't think he could. I think his thing was, I'm going to worry about it, right? Look, every artist wants to be desperately liked. And so that's why they'll say things stupid sometimes. Like, that has nothing to do with art. They'll just say whatever popular thing's going on socially, I'm for it. I'm with it. I do it. They don't know. They don't want to be disliked at all. And so they don't want to give anyone, they want to give more reasons to like them or give them the benefit of the doubt. So that they're a fairly insecure group. And they think that there's only this much pie. But when there's a Sam Keith or what I do or a number of other people, we just make more pies. And now you have more choice. And that's all it ever was. I always saw it that way. But my heroes were very different, guys. Wrightson, everyone, he didn't do superheroes. And they invented a whole genre for Wrightson in a monster superhero, changed the face of comics. I think they're going to do a Moon Knight series, and that came from Werewolf by Night and all those kind of, that was imitating Swamp Thing. So those characters, to this day, if they did a great Werewolf by Night series, they would have a home run like they wouldn't believe, right? If you did those, you don't even have to do anything new, just adapt those 70s comics. Well, that's where I came from. That's where he came from. So at that point, you just begin to think, well, okay, you don't like it. I have a lot of people come up to me and now, and they say, I didn't like you, now I do. Or I didn't like how that first thing shocked me, now it's the only way I see it. That's great. I mean, transition that kind of thing is great. I don't think Sam got to have that. And he didn't also go into it thinking, I used to tell him, so what if they don't? I mean, there's a lot of stuff I mean, when you're trying to be yourself, or when something happens like that, and it's cool, you're not going to get, I mean, people are still going to like Journey. They're not going to like some obscure cool band. And that's okay, but they're not going to, that's just the way it is. I used to tell them, we're not going in there saying, let's do the best Avengers book ever, you know, and draw it just like that. I can't do it. I could, but they aren't going to like what I do isn't going to be what they want. But I used to tell him that, and I'd say, but if we did, it'd be the best selling issue they ever had. It would be the one that would knock everyone out. And he says, how can you think like that? I said, it's easy, because it's true. I said, that it's just true. I said, I had to solve the Neil Adams question twice on how do you do Batman or how do you do Deadman after him. I said, so drawing the Avengers would be easy.
I was just getting ready to say, man, and stepping a little bit back more into your career, when I saw your Deadman, my tiny little brain exploded. I have never seen that character. He's always been one of my favorites, but there was something about the rawness of Neil Adams' work on the series that I always enjoyed. And when you came on to it, I'm very much into Frazetta and Wrightson, and when you came onto the series, you brought those sensibilities, but you also, it feels like, didn't try to completely throw out anything else about the character. Can you talk a little bit about how you approached Deadman and how your relationship with that character started?
First, the script was really interesting because it was ambiguous on any descriptions of how it should look, but it was very clear on its tone and its atmosphere. And it was a true ghost in the true sense in a horror story. There was no saving the world from a villain or no teaming up with anybody. He's a ghost in a rural setting with a haunted circus, which is everything I wanted. Now, I didn't ask for anything. They didn't know I was a horror artist or that I had a predilection to horror. They just hired me because I drew a weird dead man. And all they knew was Micronauts and stuff like that. So when they got it, it was fully formed horror art. I love Neil Adams. I can easily say I love Neil Adams, but there's no way to draw it like Neil Adams because there's only one. And even if you're terrific and you imitate it, it's going to look like imitation Neil Adams. So the only way to do it was throw it all out, start from fresh, act like I went into it thinking absolutely, not the first day I blew it. I tried to draw like Neil. It sucked. I chucked it. But the second day I remember walking upstairs to my studio and I wrestled with it all day because I hated what I drew the first day and nothing was happening. And walking up the stairs, it just sort of hit me. He's dead. Draw him dead. And do not throw everything out. Act like you invented him. No one has seen this character before. You're inventing him. Then the third thing said, don't tell anyone. Don't tell the editors. Don't tell anyone. If they fire you, fair enough. You know that. I made a deal, a contract. Do not bitch when they fire you. And once you relax from that fear, once you relax from it, great things happen. Great things. That's easier said than done because depression is fear slowed down. So you want your fear to push you like in a good place. First, it's the explosion you're running from. Then the fear runs that I'm not catching up to the place I want to get to fast enough. Am I going to get all these ideas down on paper? Oh my God. So, and that was that transition. And after the first week, I knew I had it. I knew I had it because I'd look at it and go, there's nothing like this. And I'm liking this. So I didn't really show it to anybody. The first people I showed it to weren't industry people, but they were fans. They hated it. They were friends of mine, but they're all, Kelley, what are you doing? Right? Because they're thinking Neil. And I didn't get upset, and I don't go, oh, and I'm not one of those guys who tries to explain someone into liking my stuff. You like it or you don't. That's fine. And I listened to them, and this magical thing happens that every single point they were bringing up was true, was right on the money. But it's the reason, those were the things I like, what they would say, this is wrong, and that doesn't work. They would do that, and it was all right. And it's every reason I loved it. But I didn't say, that's exactly, you're saying, if you just added, I love it at the end, or I like it at the end, that's it. Yeah, because someone who loves you just goes, I love you, right? But someone who hates you will take great detailed notes on why they do. They're the ones to listen to, because they're telling you, I'm not meaning like you ignore criticism. It's not that. But they're telling you why it works. And if you read any great review, negative review of something, read the negative reviews of David Lynch films, and you'll see why David Lynch is great. Not because they're fogies and they don't get it. They're telling you exactly why this movie works. It didn't tell me it was ambiguous. Yes. It was nightmarish and out of context. Yes. It's asking you to think. Sorry, you're going to have to think and experience and let your emotion take over, not your intellect. So once these people were doing it, they would say, oh, we're sorry, but you're asking our opinion. I said, no, this is fine. The trick, though, after something came out and it was as successful as it was not to go and act like you're rubbing your nose into it. Or that's what I always used to tell Sam. You got to tell people, hey, no, that's cool. I just sold 100,000 copies of it, though. I just got an Eisner nomination for it. Okay. That's what happens. But if if you only want someone to love you, you'll fall apart. If you only listen to the positive, you won't. Nothing will happen. Then you're devastated if something doesn't go your way. So I'm cool with it. I don't. Stanley Kubrick never won a competitive Oscar, so okay, David Lynch, they give you the honorary stuff. They don't ever, at the time, they hate it. So I'm fine with that. I'm cool with it. If you read Rolling Stone reviews of records that are classics, they're embarrassing how off they are. But they always tell you why something works. I mean, they always invariably tell you better than the people who love it. It's just this weird thing. Because emotion is, I'm in love with this beautiful girl. Well, tell us about it. She's wonderful. But if you say this girl's awful, they will give you a checklist down awful, awful, awful. And you go, okay, there you go. What don't you like about her? They'll give you a list. Emotion removes your ability to have anything other than joy at something, if something you like, just joy. And joy is a tough nut for a lot of people. And when I look at Sam's stuff, I got joy from it,
Same here.
When I look at a lot of guys that are kind of put in that box, I see joy. And it's as simple as that. If you look at the difficulties in creating stuff, I'd say that's the biggest one right there. From joy comes ideas, from that excitement. And I don't know, but a lot of people feel you have to live this harsh, horrible, disconnected life to create. And I go, it's the exact opposite. You have to take your kids to school. You have to help them with their homework. You have to have go to a neat hamburger joint you like, and you got to have fun. You got to get enough rest. Then if you want to write and draw the most depressing shit ever, you can do a much better job. You just do, if you can go and just not have, and I think this is probably, if you want the answer to Sam, I'm no psychiatrist, you think better when you don't have all the little things in your ear, good or bad. You just think better. You can think and kind of go into that transcendental meditation stuff those people do, where they try to clear their brains of stuff. For me, like I said, walking up the stairs I didn't sit there drawing things out and figuring things out, whatever. It was just walking up the stairs. It all bang, 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 bang. It's as close to being haunted as it can be, because it isn't like a voice in your ear, but it's in your head and it's saying, act like you invented it. Don't be afraid of getting dumped. Draw a few. It'll be, he's dead. Draw him literally what he is. That works. That works. Just trusting that. And it doesn't fail even if other people don't like it, because you're producing. And the more production you do, the more excited, joyous production you do, you'll infect other people with it.
That's interesting. That's a lot like what I was just listening to an interview with Walter Simonson, and he said something that was very, very similar to that. So that's really
I mean, well, Walter has a different style, doesn't he?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And even in the day, he had a very different style than everyone else. I think Marshall Rogers was not, his Batman run, which is as iconic, and I think the best run ever for Batman, was his several issues with Steve Englehart and Terry Austin. And if you haven't read them, you're in for the best treat ever. They're perfect. They are perfect Batmans. But the story I was told, he just passingly said, because on that time I met him, that the company did not really care for what he had done, enough to where that's why he was there for a little while, and then he went over to Marvel and then did independent books. But he wasn't moody about it. He didn't get upset. He didn't throw a fit or whatever. He didn't care. He got to do what he wanted to do, and he knew it was good. And Terry Austin once told me, we're on a bus somewhere, and I said I couldn't stand it anymore. And I said, I know, I got to do this. Man, those Batmans that you did with Marshall are the single greatest run of they're just pitch perfect. I think I said Swamp Thing and this are pitch perfect. Like, I dread anyone who follows it, because it's perfect. And he had said, I don't remember any of it as good because the company hated what we were doing. He says, it's why I went to Marvel and inked John Byrne's X-Men. Because when Marshall got the job, he called Terry up to ink it, he said. And he said, the way Marshall told the story, he says, hey, Terry, I got the job, the blah, blah, blah. I'd love you to ink it. And he says, really? He says, yeah, I went into the office and they said that the fans had seen a couple of their short stories come out together. And that's how they got the gig. And they weren't told, hey, fans really liked it. It said, apparently a lot of people with crappy taste like what you guys do. So we'll let you have these here. I know, but they were looking at a spike in sales and they had to follow where the money goes. Marshall was not upset about that. Marshall just saw it as a license for freedom. Well, now I got the fans on my side. That's all I need. He was happy as hell, drew his ass off. But it hurt. That hurt Terry. So Terry was always thinking, this will be over, and then they'll go, and they'll blackball us or whatever. And off he went to ink John Byrne, which was here you have the greatest inker of that period, and you lose him over this. But I remember at a Batman summit, early 90s, mid 90s, whenever I brought that up. There's all these Batman people sitting there in this hotel in upstate New York, and looked like the Overlook Hotel. It was so isolated. And they were all talking about their favorite Batmans. And I brought that up, and I was told, no, don't talk. I go, no, it's the best one. It's there are great Batmans, don't get me wrong, great stories, but that's the best one. It just is. I said, and by every measure that you measure, you go perfection. And the fact that it was done so helter-skelter, the writer, and I've taken this to myself because I always look at it and you go, obstacles out of the way. The writer wrote it, left the country. He never even worked with the artist. The artist gets it being told, yeah, okay, here, a lot of people who have no taste, like you, for whatever reason, here you go. So everything's a downer on it. The inker's freaking out on you all the time. Comes out and it's a work of genius. And inspirational to all Batmans after, and changed the world. It wasn't the Killing Joke that changed the Joker. It was this storyline, the Joker fish. That's where everyone went, the possibilities of true madness. And it was there. And anyone who doesn't laugh and be scared at the same time reading those, they don't understand comics. But that's where it happened. And all of that in a very negative situation, but because one guy at the center was very positive, the writer was disgusted with comics and all that, leaves. And the inkers all, but the artist had just great joy in him. He got what he wanted. He was going to say what he wanted. He was going to put it out there. He was immune from that point on. And once you're immune, anything can happen, right? So he was immune. Now it's considered one of the classics. You try and find it in reprint. It's hard enough to find it it's just because it's loved. I would keep that on a regular reprint rotation, if only to instruct other people doing comics. This is really, take a lesson from this. It's great stuff.
No, it's a wonderful run, man. You just don't hear it discussed. And I always
there's only
every
6
interview
issues
you do where you do Batman, you're always like, by the way, greatest run ever. And I can't argue with you, man. I grew up addicted to Batman, and as a kid, I had all those issues, but I didn't realize the significance of them. I knew I liked them, but there was other like more flashy stuff like Kelley's Batman, Frank Miller, and that kind of stuff.
All good.
I was enamored with that as a kid.
Yeah, all good.
And the older I got, the more I would find myself just kind of gravitating back towards these books, because they kind of exist in this like nebulous place where they were allowed to be themselves.
Well, there's a thing I would say, and it's not a knock on anyone, because I've drawn Batman, so I'm including myself in this, but there's moments in that Rogers Englehart run I've never seen duplicated. That someone close to Bruce looks at Batman and knows that that's Bruce. Okay, I've never seen that. The Joker weeping when he thinks maybe his great plan won't work because people won't like what he wants to do. And he starts to weep. And then in the middle, he goes, but that's crazy. Of course they'll love it. That's brilliant. The fact that he wants to trademark a natural, just a fish. You can't do that, but he's going to do it. Wonderful. I mean, that becomes the focus of his ire is over a bureaucrat not doing it. Not, I'm going to control the city. I'm going to do this. I'm going to shred your cycle. That is far more frightening to me. The fact that you never had before that, just one of his loyal minions asking a simple question, and after he answers it completely to the minion, he shoves him in front of a truck. Now, never ask me what my plans are again. Don't question me. That freaked me out reading it. That was when the other villains are all vying to have the identity of to buy the knowledge of Batman's secret identity. And the Joker doesn't show up, but you never see him, just this ha 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 ha, and he throws in a wad of money. Penguin says, I'm out. All the other villains get up and go, he's here. We're not messing with him. He's a nut job. The best introduction to a character, a villain coming in. We don't even see him. Just this ha 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 ha. And the money rolls in. Everybody checks out. That I've not seen that in the other books. And that was brilliant. But it came from a frustrated writer who just said, whatever, and I'm leaving. The artist who handled it wasn't able to check any of this with the writer. He was in south of Spain in those days, so he just drew it. Brilliant. And I think that everybody lauds the other books. They should. They don't touch that. As far as when you go back to it, it's like you're reading. It's not dated at all, and it's genius. And Rogers was a absolute genius. The fact that there isn't more between him and Englehart is a shame. But he was great. Whenever he did something, he was Detectives Incorporated with I think it was in black and white. If anyone ever sees that, they'll be knocked out that Rogers did that with Don McGregor. It's brilliant. First true modern kind of storytelling in a comic book. Is a graphic novel, so I would highly recommend those. But it is a clinic in black and white. Rogers has this very eccentric style to people then. If you see it now, you'll just see it's just great storytelling. A brilliant story, artistic storytelling, not just by the numbers.
Oh man, now I got to check that out.
I highly recommend it.
But speaking of people who weren't ignored, your Dead Man actually went over fairly well, and you reteamed with how do you say his name? Is it Doug Monk?
Doug Minch.
I just grew up reading all this stuff, so I always feel like an idiot when I'm trying to say people.
No. That's look, when I did that, I went on to do a Grimjack, few small things, Swamp Thing, and then Sandman. They came asking for Sandman, so I did Sandman. And while doing Sandman, a lot. That's when Dead Man was coming out then, because it had to go through production and everything. So there's a lag time. And Doug had really liked it quite a bit. And I was working with Malcolm Jones, who was inking Sandman for me. He was inking two of the issues. And we got to talking, and he was working with Doug. And then he just said that Doug was asking a lot about, or was saying how much he liked that issue of Dead Man. And that's how he said, well, I mentioned to him I was working with you, and I showed him your pencils on Sandman, and he really, really liked them. And he was wondering if you'd be, he might be getting a hold of you to see if you'd want to do something with him. And that's when they'd sent, he had about a month after that called and said he had an idea for a Batman horror story called Red Rain, the vampire. At that time, he didn't call it Red Rain. It was just Batman in a vampire story. And I didn't know what it was. And it just sounded awful on the phone because, Batman and Dracula and oh my God, and cheesy television movie or something. But he's the great Doug Minch, and he had written my favorite comic book. Amongst my very favorite comic books was Master of Kung Fu, but he was able to take Godzilla and make it great. And that's another one I tell people, if you want a great read, there's like 20 issues he wrote of that thing, and it is spot on perfect, especially when he brings the Avengers in. The best treatment of S.H.I.E.L.D. since Steranko. It was all, and it's Godzilla. And if you just tell someone, he shrinks Godzilla the size of a rat, you just go, what? And then you read it and you go, this is a masterpiece. But that's what comics do. So I trusted him because I knew, and I knew I loved Master Kung Fu, which is a shame the film did not do any of the stuff that he and Gillis did. That was the home run right there. It was all laid out. So I'm not a Shang-Chi fan, but it's out of not so much out of loyalty to Doug. I read those comics. And I went, what was wrong with the comics, man? They're brilliant. They are so brilliant. You could see the influence they had on the Kill Bill movies. I mean, they're that good. And everyone goes, oh yeah, the Kill Bill. Yes, there's a lot of Shang-Chi Master Kung Fu in those. Okay. Fine, they can do their superpower guy with armor, but it ain't Master Kung Fu. So he told me this terrible. Just, it sounded so bad. I was so like, but it's Doug Minch and he's a legend, so I'll listen. So he sends it to me. I read a few pages, knocks me out of my chair. I don't even get through the whole treatment. I call him up. I'm on, hang up to go finish it. I mean, to this day, I go, what if it sucked after it? But it was wonderful. Truly Gothic in the sense that Gothic is. And I like stories where I read it and I go, this doesn't need me as an artist. Anybody could do this and it would be great. It's that the idea is there. And the fact that it's not your typical Dracula thing, blah, blah, blah. I'll give him credit. He was ahead of the curve on doing that kind of a Dracula. And then he threw in these great, weird extra characters on the side. And his attitude of, as Doug told me, he says, making Gotham City be that place that he had always kind of wanted it to be. And I didn't know what he meant. So, but we were on the same wavelength on that. So I just drew it like part European, part modern, part this, part that, whatever you needed at the time. But it was a dysfunctional looking, wonderful city. And it all worked. All of this stuff, every component of that worked. And again, it was, as I went, it kind of grew in the telling. So by the time I got to, I want to say about a quarter of the way, I realized that it was changing and morphing into its own. And when I finally got to Dracula, or Batman being changed into a vampire, it grew into this huge, weird skeletal thing with wings and the whole thing. Initially, it was just, he's a vampire, and we do vampire things. But that was the good thing. That was the thing that kind of cemented I would trust my gut and trust the ideas, because that wasn't anything we sat down and talked about. It came like a full script or fully developed plot, all the descriptions there, and it just sort of took off from there. And that's where, because Dead Man had went over well, Sandman went over very, very well. So now I began to trust myself. And once you've had a few of those, the companies begin to trust you, or at least they would at that point, because I was asked to do a Venom and they did not mind at all that I went and kind of took the plot and went into different directions, because they were looking at other stuff, and at that they're looking at your stuff and they're going, okay, we can see that something good comes out of it, And I was lucky in that sense that I was having each one of these things. Even a small thing like Grimjack got a huge reaction because I was messing around with it. So, but I don't go into it saying I'm going to change it. I just go into it thinking, well, what can I pull out of here that's exciting for today, or just while I'm drawing it? Because you don't want to be bored all day. I mean, you just don't. So I started trusting that rather than this will make someone else happy. I went to making myself happy, not disagreeing with what I was being asked, not being that way, just what will make this better? How can I better punch the point? How can I heighten the drama on this or whatever? And I found that I had a dry sense of humor in some of my art, where there would be where something dry I would think this needs a quiet shot or an odd look, or I remember in Batman, somebody there would be the criticism of the long ears, and in one fight scene, Doug just had a guy swing at him with a golf club, and I had him hit the ears, and it was just a joke, but you get people pretty angry when you mess with that. But the reaction was, again, like 95% loved that. It would go, okay, but the 5% can be very loud. But again, that 5%, I don't mind it, because they're right. They essentially are right. So when I got to the point where I realized I could have all this Gothic horror and very dry kind of black humor, that goes together really well. And especially Doug writing these Gothic stories, even the monthly was a Gothic run. You just, at that point, you really you really do uh, uh, begin to trust. I mean, fully trust yourself. Now the universe can change, and they'll come in like they do now, and they have all these people running companies that never read a comic, never bought a comic, aren't fans of comics, don't care about comics. It's a commodity, a piece of machinery or whatever. So they do look at the lowest common denominator, the more homogenous, or the whatever that doesn't offend anyone, and then you can do it. And okay, comics in their very gut and very heart are an eccentric, odd thing. And once you remove that, the Eternals didn't understand it. They removed all of the eccentricity of Jack Kirby, and you got what you got. But they had a committee all deciding, here's the checkpoint boxes that don't matter. And they completely missed the Kirby bizarreness that was working in other Marvel movies. Just there were so many things there. You just go, why would you drop it? But that's not anything other than the inability to understand what eccentricity and the value of an eccentric idea is. It connects.
Another thing that I wanted to ask you about was in 1992 you did the Aliens Hive series, and I was curious. You were talking a little bit earlier about like how you had run into some difficulties with working on franchise stuff, and you also
Yeah.
had Dino Riders that was coming out
Yep.
right around the time of that first Dead Man series. And I was curious as to whether like one of those series was what you were talking about with the production being a little bit stifling.
Well, I think with when it got to Aliens, enough had changed to where I was smart enough to avoid the things that you needed to be correct on. So I didn't want Ripley. I didn't want those characters. So when they said, well, it's a story with just aliens in it, that I could do. It didn't hurt that H.R. Geiger liked the early art that he was seeing. So he liked my aliens were in the dark and they were very organic and the whole thing. But I wasn't trying to, I couldn't draw an alien to save my life the way they did it because it had all these little nuts and bolts. So I just looked at the shape of it and the form of it and compositionally how I could have it in and out of the shadows. Because my basic memory of the film was seeing it like this. So I didn't really see it, you know? And when I did see it, you don't really see it. It's quick or it's in the shadows. So as much as I could, that's what I did. And I got it by 20th Century Fox that way. Enough to where they used a couple of my moves in some of the later films. Some of the shots I did where they kill or murder or do whatever, those showed up. And they did say as much. They said, hey, we like what you did. We're going to, use some of this stuff. That was cool. But when I was on the earlier stuff, like a Dino Riders, which I love the idea, but when it got to me, they didn't like any of the stuff that I wanted to do and started changing things left and right. And that, I think it was around that time that I left. I just couldn't do it anymore. Luckily for me, people probably are wondering, well, what happened when you quit turning in work and you just didn't do it? It's just one of those great fortuitous things where new ownership took over Marvel and said, we don't want to do licensed books anymore. And they canceled them all. They didn't want to deal with the licensors anymore. Right about a month or two after I did it. So I got a nice check, signing, they had to pay me off on a contract thing. I was thinking I'd have to pay a lawyer or something, get out of it. Turned the other way around and they apologized and everything. And that was a lightning stroke. So I was lucky at that point.
I also read a pretty interesting story that you shared about Johnny Quest and Aliens Hive, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, it was just that I was very fortunate that when I'd done Alien Hive, it was a very different. It wasn't an action book with Marines and all that kind of like the other ones. It was just this really intimate little. You don't know, is she love him or is she a grifter? The whole thing with the old scientist. It was good. So at that point, and I thought, that the gig was kind of. It's funny how this goes. So Dark Horse had asked, would I come was this 93, whenever the book came out? 92. Okay, so 92 book comes out, and they said, would you come over and do a sign some for us or do something like that? I said, sure. And it was at San Diego. And when I got there, they said, actually, we don't want you to do the signing. They garbled it, which I'm glad they did, because I would have thrown up. So they said, Doug Wildey's doing a book for us, this Western book. And he would like to have a cup of coffee. He and his wife wonder if you have a cup of coffee with him. So I went and had, sure. And we sat down, and that's where he kind of laid out, he liked it a lot, though he didn't understand what was going on in it. But he liked the art a lot, and he felt like he could recognize it because it was very dark, a lot of storytelling, the inking style, all these things were tricks that was from his world. And it looked to him, he could follow it without reading it, and he liked that. But he said, I don't understand any of this, but I like it. And but at that point, he made some great comments like, well, if you want to get better, you have to draw more. You can't spend a lot of time on one thing and you have to draw, and you have to draw, and you have to draw, and you have to draw. So he says, if somebody offers you a monthly or something like that, and I thought, well, I've done that, and that was brutal. But he says, but when you get to this point, you got to think of that. And so a couple of years later, when that came, it flashed back to what he had said. And he said, you will get better. No matter how good you are, you will get better, especially something you really want to do. So when Batman came, Doug Mensch didn't want me to take it. He wanted to keep doing special projects and miniseries, spend more time. But I took it, and it was a long 3 years, but it was worth every second. And while these little points were great, he says, you want the 12th issue of that year to be every bit as good as the first issue of that year. When you're all through of energy, you want it just as much. Because you want to be professional but artistic. Everything was like, sure, you want to be an artsy guy, but you got to be professional. You got to control. You got to meet. You got to do your thing. And a lot of people miss that. He's right. A lot of people miss that. Earlier we're talking about David Lynch, but David Lynch gets a lot of work done. And he's a taskmaster, and he keeps his budgets in line. So he's aware of the art, and he's aware of the business. He can talk a weird game, but he is a very pragmatic guy. And that's what you learn. And that's what he was teaching, or at least advising me. He's not so much teaching me, but advising me. So I had stuck to that. And when that happened, I went from penciling with lead pencil to blue pencil so I could see it quicker, so I could see the shapes. I wouldn't be confined by this and then try to clean it. I would see it and then go back with a lead pencil and pick the lines that were right for John Beatty, who was inking it. And that picked up a lot of time right there. I laugh now at people who use computer pads and stuff like that, like it's going to speed them up. It's only slowed them down. I mean, they think it will speed them up, but it's just a different tool to be slow on. So, but a blue pencil, you go quick and you see things, and things change, and there's mistakes that are wonderful that make something explode. I'm a big adherent to the mistake factor, or the unintended wonderful moment that you didn't figure because you spilled something or you drew something, whatever. Batman's cape came out of one of those where I was erasing something and tried to redraw it, and I did a swirl thing, and I went, that looks better than what I'm trying to replace. So I had to follow this thing, and then it looked really good. And then I had to figure out how to do drapery, not anatomy, because it gave me an angle that I hadn't seen before. But it's those kind of things that happen, and then you mix it with well, look, I mean, Frank Frazetta, some of the greatest covers he ever did, painted pieces, were done in a day because he had to make a deadline. Just his wife would make sandwiches and coffee, and he would work from 4 o'clock till 4 o'clock in the morning. Get it done because he had to pay the rent. They weren't making, I mean, Frank did not start rich. So you know that no one's asking you to do something you have never done before, but it's sure good when one of those guys tells you, this is how you got to do it. This is the way to do it. And I'm a big uh, I'm big on keeping your ears open and listening to that type of stuff. Those guys went through the wars, and so they're going to tell you really good advice. And the reason I say you listen to that is look at the results of the work. It's so brilliant, right? So obviously they had figured out time management and production and doing stuff you don't want to do, but bringing your own skill to it. I mean, Frazetta getting Conan, no one said we want this Conan, that he just did it with a naked girl on the cover, which they never did. I don't think they could sell enough Conan, and it's still to this day the most iconic Conan. You know, I go Barry Smith in the comics, but Frank that's Conan, and it came from I need to pay the rent. I have a little child. We just had money, 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 money. But here's this brilliant, artistic, free spirit all over that canvas. So you listen to those guys' advice on things. And Doug was one of those guys. And so, and I'm never going to have that ability, but I like to work in my medium. So when I do, get those opportunities to do those things, those guys' words come to my head. It's to this day. It isn't like my words do, it's their words do. I had the good fortune of having Frazetta like my work, Wildly like my work, Geiger, all these people like my work. But I didn't know them. And I would always hear through a third party because I didn't hang out with them. It'd be like, oh my God, you know, I remember the 20th century, oh my God, Geiger liked what you did, you know? And I go, really? And they go, yeah, in fact, he said to tell you this. One of Frazetta's assistants, the same thing. He was reading my run on Batman, and he said, what's that in your satchel? And he said what he said, and they looked at it, and he says, wow, tell this guy he's pretty good. And then he says he dissected it, and you just go, wow, right? I never have a chance to, you don't have a chance to, I had Mobius, like I did a pinup for Mobius's Arzak, and I was filling in for someone who bailed out at the last second. So he was probably being nice to me, but he really liked, I had all these different things moving in this composition because Mobius is always everything's moving to me. And he really dug it and said, you and I think the same. That's really good. Now, I don't know if I think the same as Mobius, but I think what it is that other guys start to get that. They didn't look at the fact that you have to turn it in overnight or whatever. That's a given. They all have to do that. But do you bring something to the game? So, and Mobius saying that was very nice. That was very kind. And it does give you a little extra energy, but at the end of the day, you still got to do it and you still got to figure it out. And they're not going to call up your editor and say, leave Kelley alone. They're going to say, hey, I don't know who, Kelley, who? So you just have to do your thing and trust the gods that it still works. You have to stay competitive and you have to keep challenging yourself that way.
So Red Rain went over real well, and you guys had followed that up with a sequel by that point, Bloodstorm, again with Minch writing, and then you guys had followed that up with the Wild Darker Joker.
Well, the thing was that we weren't going to do a sequel. Doug said adamantly, we're not going to do a sequel, and we put it off for a while until finally DC said, you have to do a sequel. I mean, it's just we need a sequel. I didn't want to do a sequel either because it's one of those where you think everything was said, you know. Godfather said everything. The first Frankenstein said everything. Well, that's how I thought, and I felt it would lower it, but Doug wrote a good script. The Dark Joker story, I wasn't to do, but the artists bailed on that, and I forget who they were. I'm not dodging it, but I can't remember. I remember Doug being livid that whoever was bailed at the last moment. And they had everything ready to go. So he asked me if I would come in and do it. I go, well, I don't know if I can do this very well. I'm not part of it, but, and I didn't know if my scheduling wise, it was going to be very difficult. So DC moved a few things around and I did it that way, but it came out fine. And at the end of it, I went, I'm glad I did it. That had a lot of difficult moments because we did about 10 pages and then the inker quit on that and we never got the pages back. So I had to go and redraw it. And then that's where John Beatty came in and bailed me out. And so there's a lot of, but that's comics. There's a lot of chaos in these things. So those things happened. One, I was not to be the artist on, and the other, I didn't think we would do. I had other sites in mind, but both did very well. I know Dark Joker did extremely well. And then the second Red Rain, which I was terribly nervous about, did better than the first one. And that is always a good sign. Normally everything kind of tails off as you go, which is just the nature of things. But that did happen. And again, I thought that was over at the end of that one. You think, okay, we're done. We don't have to do it anymore. But no, it was one of those things where you try not to do something manipulative to an audience. You try not to also repeat yourself. You try not to do the same thing that you've always done because that's what they want, but you try to give them something they didn't know they wanted, but they really wanted it. And that takes a lot of time to figure out. Also, it doesn't hurt. Doug's a very confident guy. So when Doug Minch said, I can do it, I now knew to trust him that he says he can do it, he can do it. And when those books were in production, I knew too that the company, unlike the first one they put out, and it was more of a deal between Doug and Denny O'Neil. The second one they got behind. Not that they didn't on the first one. It's just they had other things going on, and they said, "Oh yeah, and this too." It just happened that Red Rain went atmospheric at that. It just beyond I was just hoping we'd sell half of what they were going to make. Because it was $25 in those days. So that's a lot of money for now. It's nothing, but then it was a lot. And so the second go around, you knew they got behind. So now you had a lot of eyes looking at you. And that was a little more dicey because Doug had written it and I just started adding a lot more violence to it. They're all, it's gruesome. And to this day, I look back and go, wow, that's a violent book. I normally don't do that, but that was a very violent book. But it worked, and Doug wrote a tremendously good story. One of the best Jokers was his version of the Joker in Crimson Mist. That was a great Joker. That his ultimate plan was to be the Batman's victim to totally corrupt the Batman is spot on.
Can't argue with that, man. There's a reason that trilogy has gone on to become like canon in DC.
It has. I will say that when they dumped all the Elseworlds, they kept that, and they still do Batman as a vampire and things. So that's tip of the cap to Doug because he was the one who figured that out.
Well, you're the one who brought it to life. I think it was
again. I'm not. Yes, I had a blast doing it. I think I did well, but I think it's one of those ideas that a lot of artists would have. I mean, I could see Simon Bisley doing it. I could see Sam doing it. I could see a lot of guys doing that. Was such a good idea. There's a lot to work with in that. I just was lucky that it came to me.
I think we're all lucky, but was Doug Minch like? I know you guys had, like I said, you guys had kind of an ongoing relationship with the Elseworlds releases, and when I was reading some interviews with you from 1993, you actually had made mention of like an ongoing monthly that was going to be an Elseworlds title that I don't think ever quite materialized.
Yeah, they were talking about doing stuff like that then, and Elseworlds was doing very, very well. So they were thinking of rather than specials, but doing it as monthly books or something like that. So they came to ask me about would I be interested in committing to that kind of a thing, and Doug at that point said he had some ideas for it. The only problem with Elseworlds was that internally you had some people agree with it, some people not. It was kind of DC's what if, and so what was canon, what wasn't, how far could you go. It caused a lot of that kind of confusion at the higher level. So eventually, and if some of them and some of the Elseworlds didn't do well, so they were using that as a reason not to carry on with that. I was allowed to do it because I think of Red Rain had a lot of success, so and then Crimson Mist and Dark Joker had success, so they would go along with it. But so many of the other ones, I guess, didn't, so that they kind of said, well, we don't want to, they'll let us finish, but they didn't really want to. I think it's a tragedy there's no more Elseworlds. I used to love those.
Same here. Some of my favorite stories came out of it. And there were some great designs. And
I thought it was, anytime you have something that takes a chance, that's interesting. I would do that.
anything that gives people an opportunity to be creative and open and free in comic books, I think, is a rare and important thing.
It is.
Doug upset at all when you made the decision around that period to move to the monthly Batman title?
Yeah.
Was he resistant to that?
He just told me, if you're going to do it, you better, because it's monthly work. But he was already writing it, so I would hear all of his comments and complaints and whatever while working on that book. So he used to say, didn't you hear anything I was saying, how difficult this is at that level? I, though, remember Doug Wildey's words, so I didn't. That was what I was thinking more selfishly, not about, oh, I'm going to be on Batman, though that was part of it, but that's a truism. So if it's, and also Batman is like, you can't say no. If someone says that to you, I mean, that's like, we'd like you to be the starting shortstop of the New York Yankees, and you say, no, I'm going to stay here on this team in Wichita, no offense to Wichita, but you take it. And I'd gotten over my fear of things, so of that kind of a audience. So I jumped at it, and had a long talk with Doug, and he just said, well, then it means you have to keep the dead, blah, blah, blah. And at the end, he was all happy about it, because then he felt he'd get to write the kind of stories he'd always kind of wanted to write, these paranoid short stories, these kind of neurotic villains, and this very, very insular Gotham City that you wouldn't even know there were other superheroes in the world. It was just Batman, Gordon, the Arkham Asylum people, and Gotham. That was it. And I think for the most part, we got to do that. I mean, there's a few times you would be forced to do other things, but I think he thoroughly enjoyed himself as much as you could enjoy yourself on a book, just writing, because he knew I would be his partner in crime. I didn't go against him on anything. I just said, sure, if you want to write all this, whatever, go with it. And he had a commercial angle to it, in that if you had a one shot or a 2-part thing, it would be easier to get someone to read it, because somebody could say, hey, this is good. You only have to read this one. It's not connected to 15 other books, and you don't have to know the lore. It's just a Batman story. And that did work. I mean, he was right about that. I always felt Doug, not that he missed it, but he could have been a great, great comic book editor, because he had great instincts. And he could take apart a story really well, and he had a good eye for art. He had a wide range of people he liked, and so when doing that, I completely dug the whole thing. I thought that's how you do it. I learned a lot from just being around him, but I was hanging on by my fingertips that first few months, because you're just trying to make a deadline. And there you do get the whole machine of the company pushing whatever's going on, books coming out. It becomes even bigger than what you're doing within it artistically. They'll have retailers meetings, and you have to present certain things. There's distribution stuff. You have to meet certain things. We followed more the distribution guidelines. Like some months they would say, okay, next year, when we're going to next year, Batman's going to be bumped to this release day, not this other day, because this is what they want. We had to double time it to get that book done, get that I mean, you'd lose 2 or 3 weeks in your deadline. So you had to pick it up in those issues leading into it. That had nothing to do with comic book making. That's just the real true business of it. So that part of it, and you couldn't go in and say, well, I don't feel, I'm not in the mood, or you couldn't say anything. You just said, okay, I'll do it, and so he explained all that. And I had success with Batman prior, but that's what really gave me, for the 90s, I was identified as that Batman artist of that period, because I fully convinced I had a very odd style, and I did it monthly, those two things together. And it wasn't an odd style to me, but it was to a lot of people. So those two things together, and I think Doug's thing that it wasn't connected to Detective or Robin or Azra, and none of the other books. We weren't connected to any of the others. So I was fortunate. A lot of things come together, and I was in the Wild West. Like I said, there was just no art direction. There was no immediate, anyone could see anything. They would see it when it was turned in, when they opened a FedEx box, and that was that.
Because you came on to Batman basically just prior to the Batman getting his back broken and Nightfall and all of that stuff.
I did all the covers for those.
Well, yeah, but I was gonna say, I mean, they must have not known exactly what was gonna happen with those books, and you had to have been working months out. So were you working in ice, kind of like?
Yeah, they didn't know the stories. They had to coordinate Alan Grant, Chuck Dixon, Doug Minch. So they didn't really know what they generally knew what was going to happen, but they didn't know in detail until those plots came in. So a lot of times I was asked to draw covers that they didn't really know what the stories were going to be. They just knew who was going to be in it, and I had to invent. That's why there's a lot of them that I would just have to wing it, and I was having to do 2 of those a month, which sounds like not a lot, but it is. That was a lot of cover work on those, and DC was in a position where they knew, at one point they did say that they wanted an art director on it, and then I just, I went, well, right now something's happening that's good here, are you sure? And I changed my mind a lot, and sometimes I don't know until the day of, and sometimes I'm not told until 2 days before that a cover's needed. Are you sure you want to add another layer to this? And they thought, yeah, you're right. Okay. Well, I said, I mean, if anyone's really worried about something, well, I think the only one they ever checked was the one 497 where his back was broken. But that was because I told him it would be a very gruesome shot. So they did want to see that before, and I agreed with that. So I sent in what I could feel like I could commit to, and they said, yeah, go ahead. But other than that, they knew DC was great in that period because they knew I had a very different style, and they completely backed it and support. As I told O'Neill when he asked me, I said, are you sure you want to do this? Because I think I'm fine in this area, but are you sure you want to throw me into the mainstream pool? And he had said, I'll sell it, you draw it.
Wow.
Yeah, that was it.
That's so much free. I remember that Batman, I think it's 651, where he's got that red background and he's just freaking
Yeah.
down in that cape. Man, I remember that was right after those Keith covers, and I was like, what is going on at DC?
Yeah, that was Archie Goodwin had just asked before that. That wasn't really slated to be a cover. He just said, can you do a pinup or maybe an inventory cover for me? And Archie Goodwin, I said, sure. I hadn't drawn Batman professionally yet. I sat down and did it, turned it in. I remember thinking, boy, there's a lot of negative space. It's just Batman and some bats and nothing else. He loved it. He wanted me to do something Batman with him that eventually it turned out to be Denny, but I didn't know it was going to be a cover. It kind of could fit anything to be a cover. It was fairly generic, but it was a home run for me. And DC at that moment really liked that cover. So at that point, that opened the door to, they said yes to a lot of stuff. And then I was like out of the gate. I did a few covers that were the same way. Well, we're not sure who's in it, but a lot of villains, or we're not sure, but he's in a sewer, something like that. And you just go with that. And it was exciting and fun. And we had a blast from that moment.
So how is it exactly that you ended up on the monthly title. I know you said it was kind of like a convalescence of a bunch of different stuff.
I remember they were saying somebody was leaving or they weren't happy or there was a disagreement or something like that. And then somebody else, and it was one of those things. And I would hear it like background noise because I was busy doing my own thing. And Denny ran the whole show then. So Denny didn't ask or he didn't go advise, whatever. It just hit him. Well, I got this guy who's doing these covers and these Elseworlds. He's done 3 of those and they sold like crazy. Why don't we ask him? And so he called. He didn't go by the assistants. He didn't go by the writers or anybody. He just called me up and said, would you be interested in this? Because he was having a headache. And I was never a headache. They would say, here's the deadline. Here it is. I always figured if I'm going to be who I am, don't give them any other reason to dislike you other than for your art. Not that you're late, not that you're a jerk, not that you bitch and moan. Just turn in your work on time. Right? Don't give them any other, because I went into it with that attitude that I am asking a lot of a fan, so I know I'm asking a lot of an editor to accept this. At that point, Denny just called. I said, "Did you tell Doug? Did you tell?" And he says, "Well, I'll tell him in a little bit." And so I'm like, okay. I let him tell Doug. Doug calls me. Like I said, he was like, "Oh no, you can't do this." By the end of the call, okay, then we're going to be partners. So it was this Denny's intuition. Probably Denny also just didn't want any more trouble. They were having a lot of trouble, as I remember. So he just wanted it, do it. I mean, his big focus to me was, like I said, I'll sell it. But his big thing was just make your deadlines. If you can just make that, we'll be happy. And okay. And I figured at that point, no matter what happens else in my career, no matter what, I can always tell the grandkids I drew Batman as a monthly book. You know, it was one of those. Sometimes you think like that. Just 100 years from now, so many things will be forgotten. But I think there'll be a few things they'll still kind of remember, and it'll be these pop culture moments, you know, because there's a lot of pop cultures in the 1890s. We don't remember it other than Sherlock Holmes, right? So, but there was a lot going on. Dracula, Sherlock Holmes, War of the Worlds. After that, hard to kind of remember. So I figured, well, I'll just, rather than rely on my own skills, I'll just piggyback on Batman. And at least when they tell the history, there's a 3-year run of this guy with the 2 big ears, you know?
And speaking of the 3-year run, there was supposed to be a 4th year initially, right?
Yep. They just, at that point, they wanted all the books to be linked up again. We had 3 years off, and the 4th year was going to be the last year anyway. And we had kind of set it up with this character. Some people call him the Marionette Man, some people the Puppeteer, but it was a character that was going to be our major villain for the final 4th year. And it wasn't like a 12-issue storyline. It was short stories, but it was all manipulated. What you found out was this guy basically knew who Bruce was, knew who Batman was, but he also knew who all the villains were. And he was manipulating Batman pretty heavily in certain things. That was all going to be put together. But he was also manipulating the villains. And it was a very cool little thing that I thought it was going to be pretty majorly cool. And all that revelation would be, you put it all together, because Doug's thing was, you tell a big story, you don't rush it. You put all the pieces together to when someone looks at it, they get it. And it was his way of doing a really good Moriarty. And that Moriarty was always there. Nobody knew he was there. And that's what he wanted, even the bad dudes. Because in Holmes, he does manipulate the bad people too. So it was a great, great angle, great character. And what happened was they wanted all the books tied together. I think Doug and John stayed out, but I knew that my shtick only worked being independent. It doesn't work if I'm tied to other guys, where I get the third part of a 5-part story, or someone I didn't invent or something like that. It just didn't, it wasn't going to work. And I knew, got to know your limitations, and I knew my limitations. So
Thanks so much for sticking with me and to my special guest this week, Kelley Jones. Make sure to join me next time for the second half of our interview, picking up in the middle of his legendary Batman run. But for now, I hope you all enjoyed, maybe even learned something. If you did enjoy what you saw, think about getting in the comments section below and letting me know. Share these videos with your friends. If you really enjoyed what you saw, make sure you Hulk smash that subscribe button. If you do that, make sure you ding the little notification bell so you never miss another video or premiere again. If you feel like you're in a position to help the channel grow, think about using the links in the description below to sign up for my Patreon page. For as little as $3 a month, you get access to tons of behind the scenes posts, exclusive content, like uncut interviews, and you can even get your name in the credits. If Patreon is not your thing, but you still want to support the channel, have no fear. After 2 years, I can finally offer memberships right here on YouTube. Just click the little join button and make sure you select the tier and perks that fit you best. You can also make one-time donations towards specific goals or just tip the channel using the Ko-Fi links in the description below as well. If that's not enough, you can even pick up your very own JerkComic shirts like the ones you see on the screen now. This video was made possible by the Jerk Broadcasting Service as well as generous grants from the Patreon, Ko-Fi, and YouTube members you see on the screen now. I'd like to seriously thank every single one of you who's chosen to support the channel this year. I think the quality of the videos has really been improving, and I just hope I'm doing you all proud. Most importantly, I hope you all enjoyed, maybe even learned something. And as always, I really, truly, and honestly ask only two things. Keep hitting those local shops and keep reading comics.